and I serve as a member of the Futures Conference subgroup responsible for programming around workforce development. I am pleased to introduce my other subgroup members, Drs. Melissa Bray, Dave Hulak, and Sarah Valley Gray. First, we would like to acknowledge the work of Drs. Tammy Hughes, Sam Sung, and Lori Unruh for their leadership with the Futures Conference. Thank you as well to Hirel Vicaria and the NAS office for their technical support with this webinar. Thanks as well to our ASL interpreters, Amber Bertolute and Sharon Pierre Louis. The purpose of this webinar is to discuss workforce issues that are relevant to the future of school psychology. Our goal is to facilitate a discussion with students and practitioners from across the professional lifespan. To do this, we have invited an impressive group of individuals to share their thoughts on 5 key questions we pose to them. First up, we welcome Dr. Marcia Abbott. Dr. Abbott is an early career school psychologist who received her educational specialist degree from the University of Northern Colorado, and she holds a doctorate degree in physiology from the University of Southern California. Marcia is a practicing school psychologist in Desert Sands Unified School District in La Quinta, California. Currently, her position focuses on behavioral intervention and prevention strategies on a school and district-wide level. She has presented research at the American Psychological Association's annual convention aimed at understanding the effects of mindfulness interventions on school behavior and academic success. She hopes to implement mindfulness-based interventions school-wide within an MTSS framework in her future endeavors. Next, thank you so much to Lauren Brightwell for joining us. Lauren is a 4th-year specialist student at Nova Southeastern University. She is currently on internship in the school district of Palm Beach County and serves as an elementary and middle school in Boca Raton, Florida. We are also happy to have with us today Dr. Krista Edwards, who is a 1st-year school psychologist in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board in Ottawa, Canada. She works with middle and high school students. She is a published author and co-founder of the Black School Psychologists Network, Incorporated. She is grateful to have the opportunity to continue her work in race-related stress and intersectionality among Black youth through her school board's identity-specific mental health team, a group of practitioners who also support African, Black, and Caribbean students. She has a keen interest in strength-based outcomes that results from culturally responsive intervention, parenting emotion-centered racial coping strategies to reduce poor mental health outcomes, and school community-based partnerships. In her spare time, she enjoys traveling, watching Netflix, and hanging with her friends. Welcome as well to Dr. Mary Alice Myers. Dr. Myers has been a school psychologist for 38 years, having spent the majority of her career within the Volusia County school system in Florida, where she was a school psychologist, coordinator of school psychological services, and assistant director of exceptional student education and student services. Since retiring from the school district in 2021, she has been working at Nova Southeastern University, where she teaches ethics and law for school psychologists and works with the department to address the critical shortage. For 25 years of her career, she enjoyed leadership positions on the executive board of the Florida Association of School Psychologists in roles including president and chair of public policy. She is a staunch believer in the power of professional associations to shape the profession of school psychology and help us become indispensable. Finally, thank you to Dr. Stacy Williams for joining us. Dr. Williams holds several roles within the field of education. She serves as the director of the New York State Education Department's multi-tiered Systems of Support Integrated Center, located at the University of Albany. Additionally, Dr. Williams is an adjunct associate professor and serves as the director of field training at Marist College. She holds licenses as both a psychologist and a certified school psychologist in the state of New York. Furthermore, Dr. Williams is a founding member of Creating Inclusive Communities and held the inaugural position of director at the Marist College Diversity Institute. Together with her colleagues, she has been actively engaged in providing diversity and equity training to faculty and staff, supporting initiatives to enhance diversity and inclusion within classrooms and across the broader campus community. Dr. Williams is a dedicated expert in various domains, including social justice, the establishment of inclusive learning environments, academic and behavioral interventions, data-driven decision-making for educators, and cultivation of partnerships between universities and schools. Nationally, she holds the prestigious role of past president of the Trainers of School Psychologists Executive Board. Moreover, Dr. Williams is deeply committed to mentoring students and early career faculty of color through the National Association of School Psychologists Mentoring Program. At the state level, she serves as the fiscal advisor for the New York Association of School Psychologists, actively guiding school psychology candidates and contributing to the development of content for the State Association's annual conference. Welcome to our panelists. We are so excited and thankful for you today. I will now turn it over to Dr. Sarah Valley Gray, who will serve as the moderator of this discussion.
Thank you so much, Sherry. We really appreciate our panelists, our interpreters, and we hope that to make this a really productive discussion. We have certain individuals who will be responding to some of the questions, and we hope that you provide some input as participants as well, and we hope to include that as part of our discussion. So let's take this away. And the first question that we will be asking is, what steps can we take to increase awareness of school psychology as a specialty area of psychology? It's something we have struggled with for decades. And I'd like to start this discussion with Dr. Krista Edwards, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us your thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me in this space. I'm honored to be able to share a little bit about my experiences and what I think might contribute to some of these challenges that we are facing in the field. I think in order to kind of increase the awareness of the field as a whole, it has to be a multi-pronged approach. And so when we're talking about post-secondary trainings, right, I'll be the first to say I had no idea what school psychology was after I had my bachelor's in psychology, and didn't find out what school psychology was until 2 years later. And I only found out about it because I was doing some school-based research at Johns Hopkins University, and my PI said, "Hey, have you thought about being a school psychologist?" And so I say all of that to say, because I think there needs to be more relevancy in undergraduate level coursework. Again, like I said, having no idea what it was, I have this degree that sets me up nicely to join the field, but I didn't know what the field was until post-graduation. I also think for practitioners, it's our role to really be really present in the schools that we're in. By doing so, it looks like me being in the hallway, introducing myself. Hey, everybody, I'm Dr. K. This is what a school psychologist does. And I've had many students say, "Wow, you're a doctor? Wow, you're the first Black doctor that I've ever met." You know, and so these interactions, which might sound minute, right, are actually really powerful and empowering, and youth don't forget these interactions. I also think it's important for us to partner with other organizations, whether they're mental health organizations or education organizations on more of a national, local, community level, so that we are present in the community. So parents and families understand what the role of a school psychologist is, youth understand what we do, but we're also making a wider impact to the community. So like I said, I think it's multi-pronged, and it's not going to happen overnight, but there are things and steps. There are things we can do and a lot of steps that we can engage in right now to increase that awareness for sure.
Thanks so much, Krista. And I think, you know, what you started with as you started talking was a lot of people just don't know school psychology is a thing. It's one of the best kept secrets. And so how do we let that secret go and let people know about school psychology as a profession? It's going to take all of us to make that happen. So I'd like now to ask Lauren Brightwell if she would share some of her thoughts, please.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me as well. I'm very happy and excited to be here. So similar to what Dr. Edwards mentioned, I do think a crucial way to increase the awareness of school psychology is by being very intentional about how we advertise our position and what we do in high schools as well as undergraduate universities. Particularly utilizing resources such as the NASP Exposure Project and presenting in AP Psych courses in high schools and Intro to Psych courses in undergraduate programs. And I think not only presenting this information to psychology undergraduates, but education undergraduates as well, because at least in my experience in talking with school psychologists who have been in the field for a long time, they share that they didn't even start out as interested in psychology. They started out as teachers or interventionists or careers of that choice. So I think even putting this out there to people in the educational field and saying, hey, this is also available to you as well. And also similar to what Dr. Edwards said, just being present at our schools, being in the hallways, being around students that we serve and putting ourselves out there for them to see us and to understand what we do and share what we do with them, and just highlighting our existence within the field of psychology and education, as well as the schools that the students are in.
Thank you, Lauren. Dr. Mary Alice Myers, if you could share with us a little bit about your perspective.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. So one of the certainly strongest resources we have is by NASP, the NASP Exposure Project. It is certainly easy to access versus via the NASP website. It's user-friendly for presentations and customized for both high school students and undergrads. So it's a terrific resource. With that, I'd love to give a shout out to the Michigan Association of School Psychologists, who use the Exposure Project to reach the four-year colleges in Michigan. My understanding is to reach out to all of them through their board. This work with their state level advocacy resulted in their governor signing into law the School Psychology Mental Health Apprenticeship Program for retaining and training, or the SMART bill, in 2022. So that should be a lesson to all of us, how we can really use our state associations and groups to really catapult this work. While I have used Exposure Project in my work, I am guilty, as perhaps some others may be, of using it once every few years and going and doing that and speaking to a group. We really need to commit to doing this sort of work annually. Every year in our high schools, we have a whole new group of students coming in, a whole new group of seniors. As Lauren mentioned, the AP Psychology majors is a great group of students. We need to have our school psychologists, especially the proactive, positive ones on our staffs, who are members of our state and national associations and good voices for the profession out there speaking to students. We should actually even build this into another interest of mine, which is personnel evaluation systems, so that this becomes evidence of something we're doing to support and promote the profession. So it also becomes clear that we need to have state associations, now that they're meeting in person again, use this opportunity to have colleges that are in the area. For instance, I live near Daytona Beach. When we were going to have our conference last year, we wanted to invite undergraduate students from neighboring colleges. By doing this, we don't need to have them at the entire conference, certainly, but we can have a panel presentation where we reach out to professors in those departments, and whether they're psychology majors or education majors, and invite them to a panel discussion so that they can come to us and see the collegiality and the professionalism that occurs during conferences, and that might pique some interest as well. Another solution that I'd like to suggest is one that I became aware of by being an alumni many, many years ago at Stetson University. And much like Krista, when I graduated much earlier than she did, I also did not know about school psychology, but then learned about the field. And since then have been contacted by one of the department chairs who has started a mentorship program with the psychologists that are out in the fields locally and throughout the state. So I will go and mentor students at Stetson University who have been expressing interest in developmental psychology, working with children. They might not have the professional language to know what a school psychologist is yet, but I certainly let them know that and go speak to their classes, and then also connect them with the coordinator of school psychology in our district. Another piece of that now that I'm realizing, because often even when we talk to students, they might be interested, but they don't know how to take the initiative to contact a district to job shadow, is to work with the HR departments to give them opportunities to mentor a K-12 student, to job shadow. And by that way, we're pulling them in. Students in the K-12 system are benefiting from the undergrad students, who in turn are learning about school psychology by also job shadowing at the same time. So to me, those are all things that we can be talking about and just make it part of the very natural conversation that occurs always. Much like Mike Curtis, many of you might know Dr. Mike Curtis, who has been very involved as a NASP past president and with critical shortages. An opportunity does not pass him where he doesn't stop someone who says perhaps they have a student or who's a psychology major and encourage them to pursue school psychology. Something we can all do.
For sure. Thank you, Mary Alice. And it's fascinating. There are so many young people and older people where their goal is to really make a difference in children's lives. And there is no better place to do that than in the schools. But, because school psychology as a specialty area has not sort of gotten the press that perhaps other branches of psychology have, it really becomes challenging. And so I think all of you provided many different strategies and ways that we can really impact this more broadly. So thank you for your thoughts. And now I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about question number 2. So question 2 is, what strategies can be implemented to ensure that the school psychology workforce reflects the diversity of students, families, and communities we serve? And Dr. Edwards, you alluded to this a little earlier in terms of the representation of you being present and available, and for students to really see you in their schools making such a difference. So I was hoping you might give us your thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I learned that actually in my year of internship, building those connections, where I did things that were outside of the scope of my job, right? Where I was attending Black Student Union meetings or Muslim Student Association meetings, and just really being present in my building and being a part of the building. So those are ways that I built those connections with students, and they reach out to me now, just so a lot of them going into this social sciences, and they're like asking for mentorship and asking me about my journey, and that was really impactful for them. I think this is also a multi-pronged approach, specifically. So I'll say that I'm a proud graduate of Hampton University, which is a historically Black college and university. And I really feel like if we are being intentional about diversifying graduate programs in hopes of diversifying the field, we need to be intentional about creating pipelines between HBCUs or Hispanic serving institutions and graduate programs. That to me is something that I don't think there's been enough attention given towards that partnership. And I think this is a perfect way to really increase that diversity in our programs. However, I will say that at the program level, we need to be intentional about making sure that these programs are safe for students of color. There have been a lot of students of color who are not having great experiences in graduate school, and that's just the honest truth. And so there are ways to adjust this. We really need to focus on, what does the culture of these programs look like? Are we embedding a social justice lens into the everyday curriculum of school psychology programs, right? Acknowledging where we are in the world and acknowledging how we got here. Also acknowledging the field has historically perpetuated harm to people of color, which might have a lot to do with why we don't see a lot of people of color in the field, right? And so I think by being intentional, again, by creating and curating spaces for students of color to thrive in graduate programs prevents the practitioners leaving, right? It prevents the I guess we could say like the ability for students not to graduate, right? We're promoting graduation by creating these spaces for us to thrive. I also think that translates to the practitioner aspect, right? Where a lot of, and I know Dr. Proctor has done work on school psychology leavers, right? If you're, again, not feeling a sense of creative control, if you're not feeling a sense of safety in your work, and you're not satisfied, and especially having that intersectionality as a person of color, right? Why would you stay, right? So these are things that we really need to consider. And I think lastly, I'll mention, and I've done some work with APA regarding licensure. There are varying licensure processes, whether you want to be a licensed psychologist or practice licensed school psychologist in different states. And some of these varying, I guess, processes can be a barrier, right, to keeping folks in the field or having them move to places where they're most needed, and et cetera. So this is a multi-pronged approach. I know I said a lot, but there are a lot of things that we can be doing, again, to really make sure that we are creating and curating spaces for people to thrive and stay in.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Stacy Williams.
Thank you, Krista. I don't know if I can add to the things that you shared, and I agree with you when you say multi-pronged approach. In my response, I talked about a multi-strategy approach, right? And you identified historically Black colleges, and I primarily work in predominantly white spaces, and we also have to think about predominantly white institutions being safe to our diverse students. And when we think about diversifying the field, I always like to start at the top. And starting at the top, I think about how are we attracting diverse faculty? What does that look like? And so, Krista, you talked about reaching out to historically Black colleges as a pipeline for graduate students, but predominantly white institutions can also reach out to those institutions to identify scholars of color to participate in predominantly white spaces. So at the institutional level, it's really important for us to examine our hiring and retention practices. Typically, institutions of higher education, they focus on hiring practices. And recently, I know that many institutions have been focused on cohort hires, where they're bringing in cohorts of scholars of color together so that they can experience the institution together. But in addition to hiring, we have to also focus on how it is that we're going to retain those faculties of color. Are we giving them startup funds? Are we investing in research ideas that are core to their core values, right? Because typically, predominantly white institutions don't really value faculty of color focusing on their own identity research, right? So typically Black folks, if they study Black people, that research is not considered highly attractive as it is for a white individual studying Black communities. So when we think about retention, what does it mean for our faculty of color to engage in research that is affirming to the community in which they're a part of, right? What do we think about mentorship? What does mentorship look like? How do we align faculty members with individuals who will be, I call it like, provide really good allyship and really good accomplices for their work? That's really important. When we talk about mentoring around writing, Sajai talked about the hidden curriculum for Black women in predominantly white spaces, but there's also a hidden curriculum for faculty members. And I think about colleagues who often, like white colleagues who enter institutions and they're put on writing teams, right? And faculty of colors assume that in order to thrive in this space, that we have to pull ourselves up by our bootstrap, when that doesn't necessarily happen for other people. So are we being intentional in providing opportunities to actually retain our faculties? And we also said that this is multi-pronged, multi-strategy approach. Krista brought up curriculum. Are we looking at our curriculum through a decolonized lens, right? And I wish I could share some resources, because the University of Stockton, if you actually go on their website or even just Google decolonizing the curriculum resources, you will find examples of how you can do that for your own curriculum, right? Because Krista talked about safety. And one of the ways in which you increase safety and or inclusive environment is making sure that individuals are seen, valued, and heard in your curriculum. Now, I should be I'm going to be truthful. It's not easy to decolonize your curriculum, but if you start over time and it's developmental, it will get easy. Also, Columbia Teachers College in 2021 had a decolonizing psychology training conference. And they actually, if you go on YouTube, there's actually a YouTube that says strategies for addressing curriculum, research practices, and clinical supervision. So that's a resource for this group. So we're talking about retention, hiring. Okay, now they're there. How are we decolonizing the entire curriculum so that it's not only the minoritized curriculum that we're looking at? And thirdly, and shout out to Mama D, Mama Proctor, not Mama Proctor, Deborah Crockett. Shout out to Deborah Crockett, who it was all about how do we identify funding and financial resources for minoritized specialist level students, right? And there are tons of federal grants available if we're able to strategically think about how it is that we're going to line these funding resources with attracting scholars of color. I have found that if you're in urban areas, it's quite easy to attract scholars of color. But if you're in areas where you need to attract scholars, funding resources through the federal government may allow that. My time is up.
We didn't want you to stop, Stacy.
Well, I'm just going to also say that, like, also climate surveys are also important. So, in addition, and doing a pre-post with climate surveys, you do it in the very beginning. You have students as a part of that process. You develop strategic goals based on that, and then you'll be fine. And then just mentoring, identifying mentors, not only for faculty, but for students, will allow them to feel connected to a program.
Mhm.
So many amazing ideas. Thank you so much to both of you. We have lots of work to do, but having these discussions makes such a difference. So I really appreciate your thoughts and perspectives. I want to make sure that if there are any comments among our panelists, and we haven't seen many comments coming in through the Q&A. So if anyone would like to add anything, I'll give us a moment to do that.
Hi, yeah, I would just like to kind of add a perspective when talking about diversifying our workforce, and not just thinking of urban areas, but I actually did my internship in a rural area. And I was an itinerant school psychologist for my internship. And I think I was encouraged a lot by my advisor to do that. And so I think at the internship level too, encouraging interns to branch out from maybe where they might find it easy to have their internship, and to kind of place themselves in a situation where they can see different perspectives and different kinds of kids and families. I think really encouraging from the faculty members at that level to encourage the interns to kind of branch out as well, I think can really can help.
Yeah, and really make a difference in that perspective. Thank you so much, Marcia. All right. If there's no further comments on this topic, and so that we can stay on track, we're going to move on to question 3. Question 3 asks, in what ways do school psychologists feel a sense of job satisfaction? And how do we advocate for being able to engage in activities that facilitate this satisfaction? And for question 3, we're going to bring Marcia back. Marcia Abbott, if you could share with us a little bit about your perspective on question 3.
Sure. And just this is my second year in the field as a school psychologist, and I've been considering this a bit. How do I maintain a sense of satisfaction? Being a new school psychologist, I feel overwhelmed almost all the time. And so when I was answering and considering this question, I think having your district and people that you work with and for acknowledging you and your accomplishments. I think if we can take the time, even from a teacher telling me, I'm doing a good job, thank you so much. If we can all as a group be mindful of our peers and colleagues and telling them they're doing a good job, even just that small thing is really, really helpful to increase satisfaction, because I think we all get into this field because we want to help kids. That's like the bottom line. But then, working in schools, it's real easy to get overwhelmed and feel at the end of the day, am I even helping any kids? I feel like just running on empty all the time. And it does help when you hear from people that know you and work with you that you're doing a great job. Another thing that I think is important is allowing school psychologists to have freedom in their interests and how they want to implement maybe some of the action plans at their sites and districts, because it was mentioned that I'm very interested in mindfulness practices, and I've been given some freedoms at my district to begin to do some trainings and things of this nature with staff and with kids, and that has really provided me personally with a lot more satisfaction than just being told, to stay in a lane and not being able to pursue some of my own interests. So I think fostering autonomy in our school psychologists and our peers and colleagues can really help with satisfaction as well. And then there's always the talk of caseloads. And I think that I don't think I've met a school psychologist yet that has said they don't have a high caseload. And so I think really, I mean, this comes at a funding level of trying, how do we ensure that districts have enough funding to be able to hire enough school psychologists? Because when you feel overworked, then burnout can happen. But if there's more school psychologists, and I think it's just kind of looping back around to what we've been talking about, is how do we recruit and get the word out there about school psychologists and school psychology as a field? And I think when we can do that, then it can hopefully just build a stronger community for us to be support each other in any way that we can. And finally, I think allowing and promoting time for our own mental health, right? We feel job satisfaction, I think, when we can have the abilities to step away and think and consider and wonder why we are doing this and get back to the point, which is, we're all here to help kids learn. So yeah, that's what I would have to say about trying to increase and foster our job satisfaction.
Thanks so much, Marcia. I think you raised so many important points, and I think it's almost a circular kind of challenge. It's hard to recruit people into school psychology because many people don't know that it's a profession, and then the caseloads are high, and it leads to burnout and difficulties navigating things because people stay so busy and maybe don't have as many opportunities to do some of the things that you were talking about. So lots for us to consider. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Mary Alice Myers to share a little bit about her perspective.
And Sarah, as you just mentioned, this is a really critical issue because it impacts both recruitment and retention. So there is a whole climate in the school districts right now, especially here in Florida, which I'll talk about in a moment, that makes people, all educators, not just school psychologists, often dissatisfied with jobs, which in turn causes people, young students, well, I say young students, college students, not to necessarily want to enter the profession. So when I speak to former colleagues in my district and state, and mental health professionals, much of the job dissatisfaction I hear is understandably the result of the dystopian policies here in Florida. And some you probably all have heard about, and hopefully it's not happening in your states, but including the infamous Don't Say Gay bill, book bans, the fairness in female sports legislation targeting trans athletes, prohibiting the teaching of critical race theory, and the elimination of departments of diversity, equity, and inclusion in school districts. So these kind of things have certainly caused a lot of angst for educators. It's ironic because there was a time, it wasn't that long ago, that the biggest threat to public education in Florida was the voucher system. To have those days back now when we look at the things that are happening these days. Educators now have to fear legal action if they use a wrong pronoun that's different than the pronoun that was assigned at birth for a student. So there's things that just make educators really weary and worried about staying in the profession, including school psychologists. So because of these kind of landmines, I think it's really important too, for state associations and professional associations, again, to have such a strong voice. I'll use the Florida Association of School Psychologists as a beautiful example at this point. When these bills were happening, the Don't Say Gay bill, House Bill 1557, I believe, we consulted with an attorney in the state who was able to vet our work to say, this is what we can say, this is what we can't say, and really clarify the parameters of a very hot bill and really helped us feel safer out in the field practicing when we have that kind of guidance from our professional association, and as well as the guidance and direction from NASP. So those are really important things, I think, to go to and become involved with during this time of dissatisfaction that can occur. I also find that some of the social media sites, such as Said No School Psychologist Ever, which I've just started following, is a really great barometer into what's happening in the profession and how school psychologists, whether they're out in schools or in universities, how they're feeling, and that they can help and support other school psychologists, which I think is really helpful. I see conversations where someone might be very confused and worried about something that they have heard from a district administrator, and that this becomes a way to hear from their colleagues across the country what the actual reality is and what they can and can't do. I think these kind of things make people feel like they're not out in a silo by themselves, not knowing what to do, and can be very helpful. So another issue that I find is really leading to the dissatisfaction is the whole issue, we talked about this, the referrals for evaluation, especially when they're absent of data, because it's time consuming, it's frustrating to many school psychologists I speak with, and it's a really difficult practice to change in districts. When I speak as a professional about this, is because I come from a district that had 20% of students where I live were identified as students with disabilities. That's obviously not where we should be going. When we do that, then all we can do is chase referrals for special ed and worry about timelines and not have the ability to provide comprehensive services, as NASP indicates as we should, through the NASP practice model. So all of these things, I think, take leadership in school psychology, but also in the bigger fabric of education within districts. It's so important for school superintendents to have a strong understanding of multi-tiered systems of support so they can help understand and help teachers and educators, parents, the whole stakeholders and community, that this is not about school psychologists just coming in to refer, test, place, which was a model early in my career that we've done. And we should be so much further beyond that at this point. And I hate to see us go back, but truly that we can do the things that we're trained for, that NASP supports us in doing, and that we should be doing for the good of children and families, and that is comprehensive services. And I think that will go a long way in enhancing the satisfaction for a school psychologist.
For sure. And I think you and Marcia really had similar themes around that, is if we can, in addition to providing what's essential from sort of a financial perspective, and, adhering to guidelines, allowing school psychologists to practice in the way that they're trained academically is so important to maintain that satisfaction. I oftentimes find such a disconnect for students as they're transitioning out of the academic side and going to internship. A lot of the things they're trained to do, they're not given the opportunity to do that when they go out in the field because of the demands within that specific district. And so there's oftentimes this disconnect that leads to almost like, you promised we could do all these things. And it doesn't always play out that way in the district. So, and that absolutely leads to dissatisfaction in terms of role and being able to do all of the things that school psychologists are prepared to do. So I wanted to give the rest of our panelists an opportunity if we missed something, if there was something you would like to add. Any thoughts? You're all good? All right. And if any of the people in the audience, we do have a question there, I think. So the question is, how does reimbursement, especially at the internship level, contribute to representation and retention for those interested in school psychology? What are association duties to advocate for better wages? How many internship salaries are at or below living wage? I can say in Florida, there's a lot of variability. Sometimes districts will be provided opportunities to increase the internship salary, and it leads to almost a bidding war, but it's not consistent. We do have in the Florida Association of School Psychologists a list of every district in our state and the amount of the stipend, as well as any benefits, vacations, mileage, whatever it is, to help students be able to make informed decisions around the internship application process, and so that they can be really aware of the strengths, the perks, the salary in a specific district, and compare that across the state. I'm wondering if anyone has any other comments in response to that question.
Sarah, I would like to say something. Mariella.
Go for it.
Again, I just want to mention Michigan because I think what they did was brilliant as far as getting the legislature involved and the governor to sign off on something that would focus on retention, recruitment with the financial backing for school psychologists. I think that's really helpful to do at more the state level than district by district. We can get that done. That's very helpful. One of the things also we did in Florida, though, however, was use a mental health assistance allocation, which came out legislatively, which was the purpose was to pull in mental health professionals from communities as well as schools, which certainly obviously includes school psychologists, to provide services for students in crisis. But one of the pieces in that legislation, as when it's renewed annually, indicated that it can be used to help recruit and increase the number, most importantly, of school psychologists, school counselors, and school social workers. So many districts in Florida are now using that funding source to pay interns. And that's helpful because since 2008, when the recession was here, many places, districts in Florida, lost the ability to pay for interns. When that happens, we certainly know it's really hard to get school districts to reinstate that sort of money. So anything you can find with other things that might not seem like it might be linked to school psychology, but then connected through mental health grants and other things can be very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. David Hulek?
Yeah, hi everybody. I apologize for jumping in on this, but this is something I've actually been studying quite a bit here. So we have done some work looking at the pay for school psychologists in each congressional district across the country. And one of the questions we've asked is how long does it take for students who go to graduate school to be able to pay off their loans and the other costs that are necessary for joining education, for becoming a school psychologist. And what we found is that at approximately 10 to 15% of school districts, school psychologists will never recoup the money that they spent to go to graduate school. At least will never recoup it within 30 years. Now, there are others, of course, where they certainly will, and the costs of graduate school have quite a bit to do with that. This isn't exactly what the what the questioner is asking, but regarding salaries, there are a number of salaries, especially in a variety of states that we'll certainly write about, that are simply too low to fund the type of training that school psychologists would need to do.
That's a really important point here. And I know there's such variability across the country in terms of salaries, but yeah, challenging. And I think it's such a reflection of the challenges overall in education that we're facing. Teachers, being able to recruit and retain teachers, and just broadly people in education, and how do we impact that? Because it's sort of the cornerstone of who we are as a people. So, okay, so I'd like to then pivot now to question 4. And question 4 reads, how do we promote liberation within our training programs and in practice to support school psychology, as well as the children, families, and communities we serve? So I'd like to start out with Lauren Brightwell. Lauren, if you'd like to share your thoughts.
Thank you so much. So for me, I believe the first step to promoting liberation within our training programs is through having a curriculum that is encompassing of all the factors that contribute to understanding children holistically, not just how they perform on tests. And all of the factors, as well as how to learning how to effectively advocate for the children and families in the communities that we serve. So this can consist of understanding the various aspects of discrimination, such as unjust and exclusionary discipline practices, as well as disproportionate identification of diverse students for ESE services and other common historically oppressive practices within education. So really gaining an understanding of that and how to combat that. So by learning about and understanding how these inequitable ways of thinking can often permeate our schools, we can be more intentional in our practice as school psychologists and provide alternative methods and alternative ways of thinking about this. Another thing I wanted to mention was, in addition to that, providing opportunities for advocacy work as graduate students at the state level. And by doing this, this can cultivate a valuable skill set for working with oppressed and diverse groups of students and families by increasing our own awareness about policies that promote or inhibit liberation within these groups. And so then this awareness can then shape future policies by providing a platform for us as school psychologists to share our knowledge about how to achieve equitable practices for all students within the education system.
Very good. And Lauren, have you had any advocacy experiences yourself?
No, Nova does a really good job every year of providing opportunities for students to go to Tallahassee to do advocacy work up there. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go last year. However, I do work closely with faculty member to bring awareness and advocacy for students who are deaf and hard of hearing as well. So I do advocacy in that way.
Yes, you do. Thank you so much. And Dr. Williams?
So it's really interesting, Lauren, thank you for sharing that. When I think about curriculum, it's really nice to diversify the curriculum, but then it's really important for faculty to know how to use that curriculum, right? And so years ago, I realized a lot of my colleagues did not know how to create a space that was inclusive. And so just focusing on diversifying the curriculum without knowing how to talk the talk, enter the space, connect, was problematic. And so earlier when Sherry talked about my bio, one of the things that I developed years ago was a faculty pedagogical development model to build capacity in faculty within the School of Social Behavioral Sciences to do just that, so that the purpose of diversifying the curriculum did not fall on the shoulders of the 2 minority faculty that were in the program. And so I believe that liberation starts at the top, and I'm a systems thinker, right? So how do you do that? That's getting buy-ins from your administrators and deans to create a group, a space where faculty can take risk, where they can discuss what it is that they're about to do, should not do, and they can do that in a safe place, right? So if our if our administrators are able to create that space, where faculty are able to do that, and I call it like failing forward, then we're actually giving faculty the tools and skills that they need to engage in this process in the classroom, right? And so I often think about, when there are things happening in the world, and some of my colleagues will turn a blind eye. So if we think about the BLM movement, and a lot of people would say Stace, I don't know what to say. I don't know what, I'm going to say the wrong things. And typically when things are happening in the world, the only thing that I say in my class is, how are you? That's it. And you say, how are you? And students start sharing. And we are psychologists, and you create an opportunity where you process in that space. You process for about 5 to 10 minutes. You have a code of silence, and then you kind of just keep it moving and teach. And typically what students have said to me is that they've said, thank you. You are the only faculty member to have created a space to do that. And so over the years, I wanted my faculty colleagues to do that. And we've actually written 2 research about the CIC model. And we found that not only did we build community within amongst the faculty that were in the schools of social and behavioral science, but our faculty took ownership for diversifying their curriculum. And what that meant was, when a white student reported me to my chair for being political in class, my chair would say, oh, Well, I do that too. And I teach a research methods class, and I have diversity learning objectives in my class. And then my chair would say, would you like to talk to the dean? Well, the dean was a part of the community of practice, and the dean in her class also have diversity learning objectives. And so liberation really starts at like, what are the leaders within our communities doing, and creating space where our leaders can truly be reflective. And another thing that I've worked really hard in our field to think about is not thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice as additive, but being intentional in creating affirming spaces. And so like in everything that we do, and back in the day, like people used to just think about curriculum. I also think about process, how it is that we're entering space. So I teach faculty how to enter space, how to create. Do you guys remember those games you used to play in summer camp, those trust exercises? I literally do that in my class every single day. And because I do that, when I fail forward, my students forgive me. When I have microaggression issues, my students forgive me. And so if we're able to consult with faculty, like, spend time connecting before content, then you'll be able to create these spaces where your students feel seen, valued, and heard.
Absolutely. And, it's modeling for our students as well, so that they can go out into the world and similarly do that. Yeah, I think there's so many opportunities for just being available to our students and giving them space just to share what's going on, given all of the challenges that we face on a daily basis. So thank you so much. Would anyone else like to weigh in on this question about promoting liberation within our training programs? Are there things that perhaps the audience or some of our panelists or the people behind the scenes would like to share?
I wanted to just add, like, I echo everything that Dr. Williams saying. I truly appreciate that too, because I think just even me being so fresh out of a training program, being able to see trainers approach, their work from a cultural humility standpoint is really important. One thing that I presented on at NASA a few years ago was in regard to research, like, is the research responsible and ethical for the communities that you are conducting your research on? Which I also feel that there's a problem in language in that sense too. I do feel like we need to shift the way that we're doing research. There's a huge disconnect between the programs and the communities, and so we can change this by engaging the community in the research process. It's so seldom do you see authors, PIs incorporating community members on the work that they've been contributing to, right? And so I think this is a radical mindset, but research has really been, I remember in my first few years being really discouraged and seeing a lot of the outcomes where it was very deficit based. And so for a moment, I even stopped reading so many articles because I couldn't handle it. And especially being a part of the community that was being painted in more of a negative lens. That is my community, right? And so I have done a lot of reflecting on, like, what does the research that I do look like? Is it strength-based? Is it communal? Am I from an ivory tower and looking down on the community and doing research on them rather than with them? So I think we also need to take a radical stance on shifting the way that we do research and dissemination, and the impact that research has on communities really does flow into how are we liberating the field as a whole, and are we practicing liberation in training programs?
And the theme, as you were talking, that emerged was, sort of a connectedness, a sense of, working collaboratively rather than this hierarchical kind of approach, which I think has permeated our research for decades and more. Yeah, thank you so much. Any other comments, perspectives? Any other thoughts? Well, our last question, everybody gets to respond to. And I hope to make this more of a dialogue. And maybe what we can do is even highlight everyone so that we can all participate. And so what we're asking all of us to do is to provide a 1-minute synopsis of your vision of liberation within school psychology. And I encourage people in the audience and all of our panelists and behind the scenes crew, you're more than welcome to share with us your thoughts. So I guess I'll start with Lauren. If you could go ahead and share your perspective, please.
Sure. So my vision for the liberation of school psychology involves placing a greater emphasis on restorative practices and a greater role for school psychologists to play in ensuring that these practices are implemented in our schools. And recently, school psychology has made better strides in addressing discrimination and oppression within education, as well as preparing graduates to use a cultural and restorative lens when working with children. So building upon this, the liberation of school psychology can now be transferred to graduates entering the field and paving the way for an updated and multifaceted understanding of the various services that school psychologists can provide in our schools. So this can include informing and collaborating with school staff on appropriate restorative practices, behavior supports, and fostering positive connections between students and staff. And then building on that, advocating for the diverse groups of students that we work with regarding identification and assessment practices, and ensuring equitable opportunities and experiences for all students at school.
Thanks, Lauren. Dr. Edwards?
Yeah, I think my vision for the field starts with healing. There's been a lot of harm that has been caused to the communities that we work with, the practitioners, I mean, at various levels. There's just been a lot of harm, and we have to heal from that. And we can, sort of start the healing, continue the healing process. I know it's been started with various folks in their efforts to get to this healing state. But I think it also looks like truly embodying equity and inclusivity in every aspect. And so it's not really it's a space where there's rich diversity in students, families, and communities we served, and we're working with them. There are partnerships, and that's how we kind of facilitate this healing that we need to take space. I also think culturally responsive practices need to be at the core of our work. And like Dr. Williams said earlier, like we have to be intentional about decolonizing our field. We can't not move forward until we really are intentional about that part. It's a space where me as a Black woman school psychologist, I'm not only seen, but I am heard, and I'm valued for my unique perspectives and the experiences that I bring to the table. And it's also just a field where we're not confined by traditional boundaries. And so what I mean when I mean say decolonizing, right? What we historically know the field to be. So we're not confined by the traditional boundaries, but we are flexible, adaptable, responsive, forward-thinking, and meeting the evolving needs of our communities. And I think lastly, it's where we're taking care of ourselves, where we are prioritizing our well-being, and we're being supported in the process of taking care of ourselves. That is really important.
For sure. Yeah, we do so much caregiving, we have to make sure that our cup is full before we do that. So thank you so much. And Marcia, that sort of really aligns with some of the areas that are, that you practice in terms of your work as a school psychologist. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So my vision of liberation is ensuring that all of our K through 12 students that receive equitable and differentiated access to their education. So this means prioritizing equity, and what that means is we need to address the disparities that exist in education, particularly for the marginalized and underserved student populations. And this starts with cultural competence. That's vital for us as a field to understand and address these diverse backgrounds and experiences of our students. And we as a field, I hope, are moving in that direction. I know in my training, I heard and was exposed to the idea of cultural competence. And along with this, school psychologists, we should be equipped to provide differentiated support that's tailored to each student's individual needs, looking at the child in a whole child perspective, whether they have learning disabilities, mental health issues, or other concerns. And as school psychologists, we can play a really critical role in identifying and mitigating disparities, and hopefully to ensure that every student has fair opportunity to succeed. And we do, as school psychologists, this was mentioned previously, we have the unique opportunity to act in the role of advocates for our kids and our students, and policy changes that hopefully can promote equity, inclusivity. And I think really having that focus on advocacy on a systemic level can have a really far-reaching effect for us. And finally, and this was just said, but emphasizing emotional well-being of not only us, but also of our kiddos. Looking at them from that whole child perspective is really essential, I think, so we can see growth and foster these children to be successful in their educational endeavors and beyond their education. So that would be my perspective.
Thank you, Marcia. I'm going to turn it over to Stacy.
I'm unmuted. You know, when I thought about this topic, I thought about Bob Marley's song, Emancipating Yourself from Mental Slavery. And I'm thinking about how school psychology has a culture of deficit thinking, right? So liberation for me is envisioning a future where school psychology is liberated from the shackles of deficit thinking for both students, for both practitioners, and for both trainers. And I believe we can foster this if we engage in a practice or practices that are rooted in equity, inclusivity, and holistic well-being, right? And when I say these things, this is how I live my life. So I know that it's actually doable, but I think sometimes people think that it's just a heavy lifting. And I would want us to be champions for change. And I want us to be instigators and disruptors. And so if we're instigators and disruptors, we are being intentional in what it is that we're doing. We're leveraging our privilege, whatever privilege that is, to be an instigator and advocating for systemic reforms, right? So and you can do that from where you are. You don't need a title to advocate for systemic reform. You just need a group of people who are like-minded and think like you, and you guys can actually move together and disrupt systems and prioritize the mental and emotional health for all students. And that is capital all. And because typically when folks talk about all, they're thinking about all students from a dominant perspective and really not thinking about our historically marginalized folks. And so by liberating school psychology, I believe we're paving the way for education systems that are responsive, right? Responsive to the needs of all of our students, that are adaptive. We need to pivot. We need to be flexible and affirming. And when I talk about affirming, I'm talking about affirming to all of our identities, our cultural identities, our sexual identities, and generally supportive of every child's unique journey. This is doable. Typically, people will say to me, like, how do I support historically marginalized people? It's not a big deal. I often say to people, do you like feeling seen, valued, and heard? And they go, mm-hmm. It's the same thing for our kiddos. They want to know that you believe in them. It's the same thing for our practitioners and for our trainers. And for me, that's what I believe the liberation of our field would look like.
So, Stacy, there's a lot to unpack there. And, you talk about it, you raise so many important points. How have you done that in the spaces that you work in? And, like it, what's that?
Oh, Sarah, you get people like Sarah that volunteer you for things and then you end up doing it. Well, seriously, I'm equity minded. It's a huge part of my identity. So when I'm a trainer, I'm thinking about how am I developing my curriculum so that the students in my classroom are seen, valued, and heard, but more importantly, they can support marginalized students, right? So I'm very intentional about how I develop my curriculum. I'm also intentional about how I enter my spaces. And so, I'm intentional about connection before content. So how do you connect with others? How do you create opportunities for people to connect with others? And y'all, I loved being able to transfer these skills to an online format because I also created those spaces in a virtual world. And you can do it where people show up and they participate and they're connected to each other. So if you're thinking about connection, and again, think about your camp days when you did those trust exercises, and I model for my students, like, this is what I'm going to do. And then I say to students, now it's your responsibility to create a check-in activity for all of us. And then I partner them with other students and randomly. So they now have to, develop something for the group, and then they come and they facilitate. And typically my undergraduate students will say, Dr. Williams, you've taught me more about like content. You're teaching me how to create spaces for students. That is being intentional. If you do that, when the difficult things happen, because you've already built community, you can engage in those courageous conversations, because you're not in it alone. Because what's happening now that you've built community, your students are going to come together and they're going to help support each other. And there are many times I've asked a question and I'm like, "Ooh, sweet Jesus, I am not prepared for this." But my students are like, "Don't worry, Dr. Williams, I got you." And they got me because we've already built community. With my colleagues, I've said to my administrators, when my administrators have said to me, how do I teach students of color? I've said to them, you're asking the wrong question. I've said to them, how do I access my privilege in the classroom and understand who I am, so that I'm not creating environments that are perpetuating microaggressions? And then I said to a dean, we should do a book study. And my dean was like, okay. She bought a book, and then we decided to create a group of like-minded people. We built a curriculum, and then using my consultation skills, we identified faculty member across the college, and we partnered together, and we then created a community of practice where we engaged in conversations with each other. So once again, I didn't do that alone. We did that with a group of people. I had administrative buy-in from my team. So again, I didn't have a title. I just had a passion. And I knew that, Krista talked about mental health is important, and faculty of color get burnt out responding to their institutions' DEIJ initiatives. Not only that, faculty of color are not rewarded for their participation in DEIJ issues, because when it comes to tenure and retention time, people forget the time you spent on these initiatives. So therefore, it's not a Black issue, it's an issue for the entire community. So we need to figure out ways of getting the community involved. So if there's students in the space and you're sitting in your consultation class and you're saying, is this really a thing? Is this much ado about nothing? Developing your consultation skills will be the best skills that you will use to move a system, whether or not that system is resistant. But if there's one thing I can leave you with here, connection before content. And so, as a faculty member, I greet everyone as good morning, beautiful. And most of the time people are scared, that's what Jamaicans do. Good morning, beautiful. So you're already creating a community where people are smiling when they're meeting you. And then through connection, then you're able to move initiatives.
Sarah? Yeah, and I think those connections that you talk about, you're amazing at. But in addition to that, that does move us from that deficit model. I think sometimes, like in schools and especially in universities, we take ourselves a little too seriously. And being able to build those bridges and, really support each other is what makes all the difference. So thank you, Stacey. So Mary Alice?
Yes, this was a great question to reflect on. I appreciated the opportunity to do so, and ran across something from 30 years ago where Ignacio Martin Barrow wisely wrote, "To do liberation psychology requires first to liberate psychology." So I reflected on that a bit and paraphrased this to be, to do liberation school psychology requires first to liberate schools, period. Okay, so I really think we have to take that whole system, look at the bigger picture, and we need to not work just on liberating school psychology, but again, the bigger culture, and get leaders behind us for that work. And it requires working along with every, just like Stacey had mentioned, all means all in capitals. When I say every in capital letters as well, every other member of the school communities, including certainly students and parents. We must fervently commit to liberating schools from the shackles, which would be the beliefs, legislation, and policies, etc., that have such dire consequences for our marginalized students and communities as a result. In collaboration, I feel, with numerous other allied associations and groups, we must continue to advocate and educate to stop this current really toxic tide that we're seeing in some of our states, including where I am, and to understand the oppression that exists, and take all students, again, all being capital, all means all, where we can celebrate differences and support community in acknowledging past and current harms and in moving forward. And to paraphrase Dr. Williams also, we want to do this work very intentionally. This is not something that's just going to happen when we get up and go to work every day, but we have to think about this, have a vision for it, and work with the larger fabric of education in schools.
Thank you. And we, I think as school psychologists, we have the skills to, in terms of consultation, collaboration, and developing relationships to really make such differences in the schools and our communities, and to help move us all forward. It's such a difficult time right now on so many levels. And that whole sense of community is what we, I think, all need, and more than ever. So thanks to all of our panelists. Do you all have any other comments or things that you'd like to share? Well, you guys have been amazing. Thanks for your commitment, your passion, your leadership within school psychology, and taking the time to be with us today. I want to turn this over to Dr. Proctor to close out for us.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Valley Gray, for facilitating a great discussion, and to our wonderful panelists. You guys are excellent. Wow, what excellent insights you each have shared into your view of current workforce challenges in our field, but also the hope that you've given us for the future of the field. Your reflections on what liberation means for our field offer us each a path forward for thinking about how we can channel our collective energy and advocacy into making this field one that embraces the vast skills, perspectives, and experiences school psychologists have that can impact the lives of the children and families we serve, especially as we work towards creating a just, fair, equitable, and liberated world for ourselves and others. So we thank you again for your vision and for your work in this field. We hope everyone enjoyed the webinar and will engage in utilizing the additional resources that are associated with this webinar posted on the School Psychology Futures website at schoolpsychologyfutures.com. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.